As we have been reporting, President Trump says Iran's nuclear program has been obliterated, despite a preliminary intel assessment suggesting otherwise. An earlier report from the Pentagon's intelligence wing found U.S. strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities only set back the country's nuclear program by a matter of months. Over the weekend, the U.S. targeted 3 of Iran's key nuclear sites, including the heavily fortified Fordow facility. During a press conference at the NATO summit earlier this morning, President Trump insisted the attack left Iran's nuclear program in shambles.
They were obliterated. In fact, you can't get into the tunnels. They just put that over. That just came out. They can't, there's nothing, there's no way you can even get down. The whole thing is collapsed in a disaster. And I think all of the nuclear stuff is down there because it's very hard to remove.
Chris Meagher joins us now. He served as chief Pentagon spokesperson during the Biden administration. Thank you so much for joining us. Tell us, how definitive do you think this early assessment about Iran's nuclear program is, and how long could it take before we see some intel out of it?
Well, it's exactly how you just described it. It's an early assessment. That's the thing with battle damage assessment, is it's going to take time, especially in a mountainous region, in a place that we don't necessarily have a lot of access to. And I think that's why it was so troubling that you heard the rhetoric from President Trump and from Secretary Hegseth about this obliteration. The fact of the matter is, we just don't know. This is an initial assessment. There's more assessment being done, both via satellite images and probably by people on the ground, as the president sort of intimated. And so part of this is we just can't be rushing into coming up with what we think happened when we don't actually know what happened yet.
But Chris, given this, some Iranian lawmakers are proposing they no longer work with the UN agency that monitors its nuclear program. If that were to be the case, what could be some potential ramifications there?
There was never going to be a military solution to getting Iran to end its nuclear program. All of this was going to happen at the negotiating table. And so we need to see Iran come to the negotiating table. We need to understand where this enriched uranium is that nobody can seem to find. We need the ceasefire to hold, and we need to start these negotiations to make sure that Iran cannot get a nuclear weapon. You know, there's been a lot of talk about how we're all in agreement that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. But all along, we also knew that there was not a military solution that would get us there. So while Saturday night's strikes might have been effective in setting back the nuclear program, it was never going to end the nuclear program. And now we need to sit down at the table and hash this out with the Iranians. So we need them at the table just as much as the United States needs to be there, just as much as Israel needs to be there.
Well, speaking of those talks, as we mentioned, President Trump says the U.S. will hold talks with Iran next week. Given your experience, what is your reaction to that? And do you see a diplomatic path forward long term for the U.S. and Iran?
Look, there has to be. The hard part is with the rhetoric from Donald Trump, we just don't know if we can trust him. You know, he spent time last week talking about this 2-week pause for him to make a decision on whether to strike Fordow and these other sites. Turned out to be a ruse, as is clear by now. Part of that was to lull Iran into complacency, and that can be understood. But what is harder to understand is that he would also mislead the American people. And now we're left asking questions. Congress is left asking questions. And we just can't simply trust the words that come out of President Trump's mouth and the words that come out of people like Pete Hegseth's mouth and Secretary of State Rubio's mouth.
And more to come on all this. Chris Meagher, thank you very much for joining us.